Sixth place at PT Nagoya was a mono black vampire deck. This deck was awesome, is awesome, and we think with the right reprints is ready to break out.
Yep, it starts right now. Go put the popcorn in or get it out of the microwave. The video is happening.
Special thanks to our Patreon supporters who power our channel. Check out our Patreon for monthly giveaways, exclusive content, and even a starring role in our fan fight series. Link in the description below.
Hello and welcome to The Day.
Thank you for spending your time with us.
I'm Jake.
I'm Joel. Welcome back to another episode of Jake and Joel Are Magic. We're about to talk about some Pioneer vampires. But first, if you like the video by the end of it, consider subscribing.
It really helps out the channel. Let's get into the video. I know that we're ready to talk about vampires in Pioneer. We're going to talk about some cards today that we think would, if they were reprinted, maybe in an upcoming set. What is, how do you pronounce it, Joel? Ikoria?
Ikoria, I don't know. This year we will be visiting the lair of the behemoths, Ikoria, and we're also going back to Zendikar. The first time we were on Zendikar, vampires busted out. About 2011, there were some Pro Tour France decks that had a lot of vampires in them, and any of those get reprinted into Pioneer, the deck that's already taken 6th in a top 8 could be poised to break out. The top of those, in my opinion, Calastria Highborn. This is a rare, and every time one of your vampires is dying, all you got to do is toss a black mana into the wind, and you get to gain 2, they lose 2.
Yeah, big splashy spell. You know, before we continue talking about this card, I want to talk a little bit about the Pioneer Vampire decks and just kind of like the sub-tier cards that they're running. And the idea here is that any of these could replace, like, say, Dusk Legion Zealot.
Right.
The 1/1 for 2 that when it enters, you draw a card, you lose a life. Mm-hmm. I think that this card is really sub-tier, and a card like Calastria Highborn could replace this in a heartbeat. And we're going to talk about some other cards that could really, you know, not only kickstart vampires in the beginning of the game, but really end up being like a big closer at the end, something that can buff vampires and really close out the game.
Well, when you're playing Murderous Rider, because you don't have a vampire that carries with it some kind of removal, that is when you know you're kind of looking for a better in-slot option to be printed. This card, Pulse Tracker, was the base of a strong start. I mean, a deck that starts with either a Knight of the Ebon Legion or a Pulse Tracker as your vampire, pretty good.
Yeah, Pulse Tracker is one of those cards that it's just, you know, it's a 1/1, but it's getting in for 2.
Right.
I mean, it's just like on the attack or even at the end, you know, like they're going to block it. And we were just talking about Calastria Highborn, like being able to play a black mana once they do block it to get in for 2 additional damage, and it's getting the 1 damage off the attack. Like, this is just a card that's super fast. There's aggro all over this. I think it's a card that if it got reprinted and was in Pioneer, it wouldn't be restricted to just vampires. I think a lot of aggro decks would want this card.
Yeah, absolutely. A good aggro deck is going to have strong openings almost all of the time, so 8 strong options to open with, and then some protection against board wipes or removal on the back end, because you need value the entire time. You don't want to burn out with your opponent at like 6 to 8 life, you know what I'm saying? Vampire Nighthawk,
exactly.
I'm not sure if this would slot in immediately into the Murderous Rider slot where that 3-drop is now. It's kind of an in-between-Z. It's not fast enough to get on the ground and go like Gifted Aetherborn, but it is, and it's also not slow enough, it's not big enough or like splashy enough to be cheated in with Sorin Imperious Bloodlord. So this is kind of middle of the ground one, but a card that has been reprinted 1,000 times, and you know, we could probably for the memes see Wizards putting it in Zendikar later this year.
But I also think it is notable to talk about, you know, a lot of these vampire lists are vampires that are on the ground. This is a vampire that is in the air.
Yep.
And so it's going to answer pretty much anything that doesn't have trample. And it's also going to have that evasion that's going to let you fly over. And a lot of the vampires that do have flying are bigger. They're like
absolutely
beefier vampires. So
well, and look at one of the biggest decks in the format right now, Spirits. This thing is great out of the sideboard. If it doesn't have a slot in the main board, as a vampire, that's relevant. That's a flyer, so that's relevant, and is going to kill anything it blocks. Very relevant. This is a huge sideboard option at the very least.
Yeah, the 3-butt on Vampire Nighthawk is notable as well because, Wild Slash and a lot of the removal just isn't going to add up for this.
Yeah, you've got to hit it with a Fiery
Fatal
Impulse.
Push this without a Revolt trigger.
Right.
So this is a really cool card that never really found a home in Modern, but we do kind of think, if it were reprinted to be Pioneer legal, it could make a splash.
I know it would go into the mono black deck in Standard. I'll tell you that right now. Here's another one. Gatekeeper of Malachor. This is one of my favorite cards from Zendikar Original. This was when Jake and I really got back into the game in earnest in college. Oh, yeah. This card was huge, and the deck is already mono black, as it is in Pioneer right now. This immediately, for me, slots in instead of the Murderous Riders. You can put the Murderous Riders in the side if you need targeted removal. But this is the kind of
planeswalkers and stuff.
Exactly, right. This is the kind of card that I think if it gets reprinted, it's slotting in.
Yeah, it's just so good, and I love the art on it. It's just like, you don't mess with the Gatekeeper of Malachor, man. Like,
not at all.
It's such a cool card, and also there's big targets in Pioneer where the sacrifice on this becomes really, really relevant.
Right.
Having that additional sacrifice option with the kicker, it's just so huge. Just having a body and a sacrifice spell on one card without having to do any extra shenanigans. I mean, if you want to play Murderous Rider, you have to pay 3, and then what is the cost to get the
3? So
the
it's
body?
6 mana total to
that's just
kill
too
a
much.
Creature or Planeswalker and get a 2/3 lifelinker.
Yeah, it's way too slow. And when you look at Gatekeeper Malachor, which is going to get buffs off of all of your other vampires that buff vampires, like if you decide to do the Orzhov build, I think like this is a really good. I think it's a really good card. I would love to see it reprinted. I would love to play with it in Pioneer.
We saw with Theros, they reprinted Grey Merchant of Asphodel to give mono black decks a little kick, and possibly just for the memes, just to build some buzz around the set. You want to know what card would build some huge buzz around the set, like Zendikar Revisited? Gatekeeper of Malachor for sure. This is one of the cards that I was talking about. A good aggro deck's going to want early threats that are as beefy as possible. Whatever the drawback is, we don't really care. We're just going all in on as much damage as we can, and then we want to protect ourselves from board wipes or removal on the back end. This is the kind of thing. Drop this turn 1. This slots in there with Pulse Tracker, Knight of the Ebon Legion, Vampire Lacerator. This was in the Pro Tour builds. This, I believe, would make the entire curve of the deck come down a little bit. So you're possibly running 3-4 ofs at the 1-drop slot. And this is a common. This is a common I could see reprinted if Malachor is hugely embraced in the next Zendikar.
Yeah, and the downside on the card, I mean, you got a 2/2 for 1, and the downside is at your upkeep you lose a life unless your opponent has 10 or less life. It makes perfect sense. It's a fair card. I think it's the kind of card that Pioneer Aggro wants. If you really want vampires to be a potent threat, a 2/2 for 1 with 0 like blocking or attacking drawback is really, really good. It's strong.
Exactly right. And we would be remiss without mentioning Big Daddy Vampire Nocturnus. We see, I believe, Jake, and you can confirm this, the last printing of this in M13, at least into a set where it would have been standard legal. And this is the kind of card, if this gets reprinted in a core set, if they decide to embrace the Vampire Tribe this year for some reason, because we're going back to Zendikar maybe, I'm not really sure, but this is the kind of card that...
I mean, vampires if there are not vampires in the next Zendikar themed set, it's not going to make a lot of sense because it has been there in Battle for Zendikar. It was there in the original Zendikar. So I'm expecting to see some big splashy vampires. And that was a reason a lot of people didn't bring vampires to these latest Pioneer tournaments was you were saying that it came down to testing, but then also just not enough support for the tribe. It's just missing one or two pieces, and that's the idea with this video. These could be those pieces.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That takes us back around to the beginning with Kalastria Highborn and to the end of our vampire possibilities video. Let us know which ones you think we missed. We didn't talk about Bloodghast. Holy crap, there is a perfect example of board wipe protection, having creatures that can recur. Kalastria Highborn, another example of board wipe protection. Let's just get on the way out. We'll pay some black mana. We'll get some extra value out of the creatures. You know, pop more damage on our opponent.
Bloodghast in this format in Pioneer. Bloodghast means a whole new opportunity for dredge variants. We would see prized amalgam come up. We would see a lot of crazy stuff. So if we do see a standard reprinting of Bloodghast, that's going to be really, really crazy.
That would be wild. That would affect Standard in a huge way and Pioneer in a huge way. We really appreciate you watching. If you wouldn't mind hitting like, hitting subscribe, it really helps us out. We've got a special deal running right now over at our Patreon if you want to support us further. Free t-shirt for the first 5 people to sign up over at our Patreon. We've got giveaways running every month. As soon as we get those going, make sure you get over there and join us, please. If you want to hang out with us, we're streaming most Tuesday and Thursday evenings over on Twitch. Jake, I've said it all. I'll say it again in the future, but I'm tapped out.
He said all the things. I didn't say anything.